Don't it make sense now? Things are getting real, getting intense. I always forget the lyrics. I love that song. Hey, this gonna be simple, and it's something that Democrats knew, but I'll be honest, I didn't know. I saw Trump as being pretty much any other Republican, and maybe if coexist, it would be, he'd just be next generation Reagan. And let me also say, I can't tell black people to vote for Biden. There's too much there. It's not just the crime bill. There's way too much. So I can't say anything on that. I'm not voting for Biden. I'm not in a battleground state. Trump will lose my state by many people. He is hated on the West Coast. Black people could stay home and not vote. White people would vote him out, even in the rural parts now. So maybe not so much Northern California, but this is on you, white folks. This is on you. Y'all have let this cult, and the reason why, I'm going to tell you straight up why I've come to the conclusion that they are a cult. And it's not just MAGA. It's Republicans in general have become this. Remember, this is the second president in a row that have taken the reins of this country on a national level and steered it hard into the ground. And have done it in the same ways. But the thing is, what's different with COVID is that there's an ideological divide to the point where this cult is completely unequipped to deal with this catastrophe. And the reason why I came to this conclusion was I saw a poll where Republicans were asked, and they were asked a few things that were disturbing, but two things stood out. They were asked if they thought it was acceptable. I think that was the word, maybe a different word, but I think it was acceptable. And I'll put the link to this, that more than 170,000 Americans have died of COVID, and 57% said yes. I don't remember the actual number. I think it was in the low 60s, said that they are better off now than they were. Now, that doesn't bother me as much because I know, America has 15 million white millionaires at least. That's the low estimate. So millionaires aren't really getting hit as hard. Some are. But this isn't coming from them. This is coming from folk who are really having issues. And that's what I mean. Even if it was people that were doing better somehow, with the economy shrunk like it did, even if it was, they're not looking at the fact that, like I said, the economy is shrunk. And that's when I'm like, yo, this is so divorced from reality that you can only contextualize this in a way where you say, okay, I won't even say contextualize. Like if you're going to make a mathematical formula, you would turn MAGA into a big C for cult. Where no matter what reason affects them, you're going to have people who are completely against reason. And I've seen this firsthand because I, on Facebook, used to do it on Twitter until I got suspended. I debate with the hucklebucks in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party because neither one really have a progressive agenda for black people. The difference with the Republican Party is what they're doing with COVID. The MAGA attitude towards COVID is insanely regressive. And the thing that they're missing, and I'll provide a source for this too, because this polls people, and it also looks at the economy in different areas that had a lockdown. They're blaming the economic dip. Some will say there isn't an economic dip because NASDAQ is doing okay. Everything else is all pretty much everything else. There might be one exception, but every other measure of the economy is bad. Very bad. Depression level bad, if you're going to be honest about unemployment numbers, because we consider anybody who's not if you're not working and you don't qualify for unemployment, you're not considered unemployed. They're just like, oh, this person doesn't want to work. So the actual number is probably around 17, because of the people that are not filing unemployment, unemployment was only 6 months. It's got extended. I don't know if it's like 9 or a year right now. So there was an unemployment extension. But, so normally I would say the vast majority of people who aren't unemployed and are not getting unemployment, they actually want to work. In this case, you've got people who didn't qualify, and those people, you could say a lot of them want to work. But then you also have people who are extended right now. So that's a little bit different, because you have people who can't run out for, I don't know, since extension, they probably got at least a couple months of guaranteed unemployment. So that's a little bit different. But the true number is well over what it actually is. It's well over the people filing. I would say it's the actual number is 20%, but I think of that 20%, because there was an extension, some of it more than usual, it's a better way to put it, is people that don't want to work, either because their savings is stupendous, or they're burnt, or they're crazy, ultra lazy, whatever. But there is that factor, but the actual number is 20%. When you eliminate the people that don't want to work, I doubt it dips to below 15. It's probably, and there's probably a poll on that. But what this source looked at was, it talked about how the economy had shut down before. Because when you press people on, like MAGA people, on like, look, the economy is doing terrible right now. You're not doing enough about COVID. They're like, well, if they don't pull up the stock market, like most Americans actually own stock, if they don't pull up that, their thing will be that the reason why the economy shrunk was because states were shutting down because of quarantines. And that right there also goes back to Colt not doing research, because you already have a conclusion. And one thing that this article says is, it does show like these states where their economy was shrinking before the lockdown, and the lockdown didn't push it much worse than it was. But one thing they're not looking at, and this article does have, is it shows that 60% of people who would have gone to stadiums in the past would not now. I think restaurants was like 50%. 38% were people who won't even go to their friend's house for dinner because they're worried about COVID. And you could look at all these things. I don't know if zoos were on there, but it had anything that involved being around people, even your best friend. People were changing their mind on this. And that is what was shrinking the economy. They can't look at demand, because everything is supply side with them. That's why so much of the stimulus went to supply, went to the wealthy, went to the owners. Whereas a real liberal, and this is why I'm not convinced that Biden would be much better, because he's not liberal enough. Like Bernie would have been good. Bernie Sanders, any ultra liberal, Mike Gravel. The way you deal with COVID is you have to pump money into people by paying them to quarantine. Because when you're only giving people $1,200 over a bunch of months and extending unemployment, and there was an extra little bit for unemployment too, when you're only doing that, you leave out a whole bunch of people, especially when that $1,200 was garnishable. Some people didn't get shit. You leave out a whole bunch of people who are then forced to break the quarantine. And now it's like, oh, somebody's trying to open up shop. And now you're pointing the finger at the state for saying, hey, you're breaking quarantine. We need to lock down. Not realizing that you do need to lock down, because if you don't and it gets worse, and it actually got better. The half-ass quarantine got, COVID numbers dipped. And what happened after that was we had people just go back to doing their own thing. And I'm not even sure if the actual protests were that bad, because people, in a protest, you want to wear a mask. That makes it more intimidating, even if you ain't finna do nothing. So you have masks, you have, the outdoors where it's harder to transmit. But you also have people like, wait a second, if we out here rioting in the streets, then I'm going to go to this party. It laxes a whole bunch of things. Perception. Like, we're not really quarantining anymore if these motherfuckers are out here protesting. And I don't put this all on protesters, because they were protesting shit that needs to be protested. They were rightfully angry. If you had a stable police force, not an overpaid, murderous, racist police force, the chances of this happening would be much lower, and there probably wouldn't have been a goddamn multiple protests. If you're actually arresting murderous cops, there wouldn't have been multiple protests. The shit's just gotten common enough, and we got cell phones so we can see what really went on, to the point where it's an agitator when we're trying to come together and do our civic duty, and should be getting paid to do it, and snuff out the COVID flu, really. And I don't even like calling it a virus, but it's pretty much the same thing. But the thing is, and I do want to get on this, because another pushback you'll hear, and this is people who haven't done research. Like, if you aren't factoring demand, you aren't doing research. If you're just saying, well, the states did this, you aren't doing, because one, they didn't. And two, the fact, had they not done anything, it would have been worse. And the reason why I say this is people will bring up Sweden, but do not really look at goddamn Sweden. Because Sweden was surrounded by nations, and I'll just see if I can name them, because I'm not looking at any notes here. Norway, Denmark, Poland, Finland. I got all four. Those are the nations that surround Finland. All of them had a stricter quarantine than Sweden. I mean, those are the ones that surround Sweden. All of them had a stricter quarantine. Norway, Denmark, Poland, Finland. Sweden had more cases and more deaths than all of those countries combined. So they're already surrounded in an island by countries that are quarantining much stricter than them. And that's another thing. People act like, you can see pictures. People in Sweden, when they went to airports, they wore masks. It wasn't like they were this crazy. They also banned amusement parks, which, all these amusement parks that are closed, they're not going to open up unless you kill COVID. So we're acting like Sweden didn't do shit at all. And their numbers aren't atrocious. They're worse than all the nations around them combined, but their numbers aren't atrocious. So that's one thing you can kind of take away. Oh, if you do little and you leave it up to the people, then the numbers won't be terrible. But then their economy still shrunk by 9%. And that probably has a lot to do with, one, you close up your amusement parks, and anything that I think had more than 50 people in Sweden, it was like a case-by-case basis, which is lax compared to what other countries did. But their economy still shrunk by almost 10%. That's what I mean. They're not really looking at Sweden. And another thing is, they didn't get herd immunity for having more deaths than all the countries around them combined. Around them. Not like if you spread out, you'll find countries that were hit harder, like Germany. Go far out, Italy was hit much harder. So when you have people who are throwing out meme-ish talking points as an excuse to not do anything, because like I said, the solution is a real hard pay people civic duty quarantine. That's the solution. That is how you can then open up Magic Mountain and Disneyland, is a real hard paid quarantine. You can't half-ass it. We have the money to do it. We spent it on supply side. When you put it to them like that, they're like, oh, you want to just give a welfare handout and blah, blah, blah. Even though we're already giving supply side welfare handouts. And this is not a handout. You are paying people to kill the motherfucking virus. Like you paid the goddamn military. Oh, I think it's like our budget is $700 billion. More than the top nations. Like, I don't know how many. I could put a meme on that. That's an actual meme logic that's true. You paid the military to defend the U.S. You pay people to kill the goddamn virus. And you know what? It would help the economy too. You wouldn't have, I've heard that 40% of businesses in the U.S. have closed for good. And let me tell you, it ain't because of the government. It's because of COVID. When people don't even want to go to their goddamn friend's house, you think they want to go to the office. A lot of these office buildings, I know firsthand, have ghost town, downtown commercial districts, even though they're still up and running. But when they ghost a district, the food shops and the barber shops and the little knick-knack shops, all of those are like, wait a second, all this commerce is gone. People are working at home. It's remote. It's not going to change. My business is fucked. I'm done. Permanently closed, had nothing to do with the government, but the government could have saved it if it wasn't a cult running the goddamn government. So I'm saying, white folks, you need to get rid of this shit. You need to, and not do this shit again. And don't vote shame black men, because we're talking about two people in Kamala and Biden who haven't done nothing for black people, nothing to change the wealth gap, but they've done a lot to add to the wealth gap. I've done a lot of videos on that. That I've already stated. But I'm saying, like, I'm not going to tell black people to vote for Biden and Kamala, but I will not say, if you're in a battleground state and you want to fire MAGA because of COVID, I'm not going to argue with you at all. I don't care who you are. But if you're white, I'm saying it should be your goddamn civic duty to get rid of this cult. And when you do that, understand that this cult that, and here's another thing I'm glad I didn't leave out. And it'll explain why you can't let this cult exist. I don't want to go back to what I was saying. I need to make this point, and really this will be it. Because if Trump himself will say some shit like this and not get checked, that means you have, because you are the majority people who voted for this shit, you have ran this country hard into the ground against your own goddamn reason. Trump, in a rally, I forgot what state he was in, said, and I'm paraphrasing, that other countries are having COVID spikes, and New Zealand had a big spike, and we don't want to be like that. In a day, New Zealand went from 0 cases to 9 or 13. I think it was 9 and then 13. 0 to 9 and 13. The U.S. is in the 30,000s a day. 30,000 new cases a day. 30,000 new cases. Boom, boom, boom. Dips 40,000. It'll dip to 30, go up to 40, dip on the weekend. And what I was going to say about China is it showed you how to get off of these restrictions. So did New Zealand. Strict quarantining, religious use of masks, which helped Japan, because Japan didn't quarantine that much. And even then, their numbers are kind of dipping up again, pretty bad. He could have used Japan as a point, but he didn't want to, because he's trying to argue that the shutdowns messed up the economy with no evidence. But I can show you polls that show that it isn't, and I can show you the actual economic measures for the states during the time before the lockdowns that show that it isn't. But China, New Zealand, China did it with strictness. New Zealand did it more, you know, with liberal politics. You know, communist and liberal is two different things. When it's like, here's a bowl of rice, stay in your house, we'll give you a little bit of money for rent, which is more like what China was doing. And I'm not trying to be bigoted, but I mean, they weren't really giving people a lot of food to stay home. Where New Zealand is like, well, let's just pool all the money and spread it out, and we'll expand healthcare, and you know, and if we can't do it, we'll try to get people like whatever services, and it was just more demand side government, and that's what's needed, because right now demand is what's dying. You could open up Magic Mountain, people ain't gonna go. You could open up the movie theaters, people ain't gonna go. Enough to where it would save these businesses. So the only way to deal with this is to kill COVID. Or you can say, okay, let's see how this already paranoid / crazy group, next to people who have been experimented on by science, who have had sabotage, you know, and actually wasn't just black people, but I won't even go there. But do you really want to rely on a vaccine for a flu virus? You know, this ain't a pox. We used to vaccine in measles and shit and smallpox. But a flu vaccine is a little different, especially this, because unlike the Spanish flu, herd immunity was not gained, because you get it multiple times. Like some flus, at least with the Spanish flu, that's what killed it. It was herd immunity. They didn't get a vaccine. There's no Spanish flu vaccine. So you hope for herd immunity and kind of went along with this half-ass quarantine, lockdown, where people were forced to work. And you didn't get it. It didn't happen. And really, if Sweden wants to kill it, they're probably going to have to do a stricter quarantine. They've, you know, I could go more into Sweden, but they're not out of the woods. You know, considering they didn't do much, they only closed, you know, arenas and amusement parks, and they closed, and they wore masks at the airport. That ain't a lot. And they weren't destroyed by it. Like the numbers are low enough to where I think they could snuff it out with a quarantine. I don't know if they're going to do that. And if they don't, they might just mill around and their economy will stay shrunk by 10%. Because demand, as long as you have 200-ish, 50-ish, 50 or more new cases, it's going to affect demand. Because people aren't trying to track home a flu that could compromise their health, even if, you know, it's not likely to kill you. Even if your health isn't the best, it's not likely to kill you, but there's an off chance it can, and there's a better chance that it can mess up your organs, mess up your heart, you know, do things that, and even if you avoid that, what if you give it to one of your loved ones who doesn't? And I know parents who have died from this, survived by little children who just have their hands up in the air like, what, really? This shit came and killed my mom. So that's it, man. And don't voter shame, because they haven't offered black people enough. You know, and we're sick of being Captain Save a Goddamn Nation, fighting in wars and we don't get reparations. So this ain't on us.